I'm Gail. Standing in my brother Ethan's living room, surrounded by relatives who once ignored me, I felt a strange sense of calm. The room was filled with the smell of beer and the sound of a football game on TV. Ethan, my younger brother, was sweating slightly as he tried to act nonchalant. My parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, were beaming with false pride, introducing me as if I were some kind of trophy. It all started when a photo of me at a Pentagon cyber security briefing appeared in the Washington Post. Back in my hometown of Millfield, it was as if I'd landed on the moon. Suddenly, everyone who had ignored me for years started calling my parents, and they couldn't stop talking about it. But I remembered clearly the day of my promotion ceremony. I was about to be promoted to major after 18 years in the military, clawing my way up from an enlisted intelligence analyst to Pentagon operations. 3 days after my father, Mr. Thompson, looked me in the eye and said, "We're not wasting our time on your pathetic little promotion ceremony." I stood in a packed room at Fort Lewis, dressed in full dress blues. The room was filled with the familiar smell of burnt coffee, floor wax, and cheap perfume. Proud parents, wives adjusting collars, and grandkids climbing onto folding chairs filled the space. An older man in suspenders was already crying before the ceremony even started. I was completely alone, except for my neighbor, Mr. Harris. He was an 80-year-old retired Army Master Sergeant who walked with a cane and complained about his knees every time it rained, which was often in Washington. He sat in the back, holding a coffee from the local diner, and gave me a little nod when I walked in. That nod almost broke me more than the empty seats did. I kept looking at the doors, stupidly hoping my parents would walk in late and wave apologetically. But they didn't. Colonel Mitchell stood beside me before the ceremony. "You good, Gail?" he asked quietly. "Absolutely, sir," I replied, the standard Army answer. He then said softly, "You earned this rank." It was a simple sentence, but it hit me hard because my family never talked that way. In my family, my brother Ethan was always the golden child. When he bought a used car dealership, he was a genius businessman. When I spent 12 months in Iraq, my father said, "Well, at least you weren't in direct combat." Ethan opened a failed tech startup, and he was still seen as entrepreneurial. I finished officer candidate school while working night shifts and recovering from a deployment injury, and my mother said, "You're just so stubborn." After the ceremony, families crowded outside to take pictures. I stood there awkwardly, holding a small box with my old captain rank. Mr. Harris shuffled over and asked, "Your folks really not come?" I shook my head. "Hell with them," he muttered and handed me a folded napkin as I realized I'd started crying. A few weeks later, that photo in the Washington Post changed everything. My mother called me one Tuesday night, her voice as sweet as honey. "Honey, why didn't you tell us you were doing something this important?" she asked. But it wasn't about how I was or congratulations. It was all about how the ladies at the local church couldn't stop talking about the photo. A few days later, Ethan texted me for the first time in months. "Hey sis, proud of you. Need a small favor when you come home." I knew it was trouble. And then, things got worse. I was walking out of a secure meeting room at the Pentagon when my work phone buzzed. It was Special Counsel Jenkins from Pentagon Legal Affairs. "Major Gale, your name has surfaced in an ongoing federal procurement investigation involving Thompson Auto Supply out of Millfield," he said. My blood went cold. Ethan, of course. He'd forged my signature on multiple recommendation letters, referencing my Pentagon position. I had absolutely no involvement, but until the investigation concluded, I had to avoid direct communication about these contracts without legal awareness. I drove to Colonel Mitchell's house that evening. His wife gave me coffee while he listened quietly. When I finished explaining, he sat back and said, "You're disappointed, not just surprised. The most dangerous enemy is the one who suddenly smiles when you become valuable." A week later, my mother called again, asking me to come home for the weekend. I finally agreed because I needed to see Ethan face to face. The flight from Reagan National to Seattle was delayed due to storms. As I sat at the airport, rereading the investigation documents, I realized Ethan had not only forged my name but also claimed I was personally backing his business inside the Department of Defense. When I arrived in Millfield, my hometown looked smaller and more worn down. My parents' house was the same split level I grew up in, with the same cracked driveway and the old basketball hoop Ethan almost broke his neck on. My mother greeted me with an overly wide smile and a too-tight hug. "Oh my God, look at you. You look so important now," she said. Ethan showed up an hour later, acting like nothing was wrong, smelling of whiskey and cologne. We sat around the kitchen island, and he tried to steer the conversation towards business. "So, hypothetically, if someone exaggerated a professional connection on paperwork," he said. I looked at him flatly. "Hypothetically? Come on, Ethan." My father jumped in, "Now hold on. Nobody's saying Ethan's perfect." I retorted, "Really? That would be a refreshing change." The old family dynamic clicked back into place. My mother stepped in to calm things down. Later that night, I overheard my parents talking. My father said, "Tell her to sign whatever Ethan needs." My mother asked nervously, "What if she refuses?" My father snorted, "What else does she have? She's divorced, no kids, and her money's just sitting in the bank." And then he added, "If she won't help, family will make sure people know she turned her back on us." That night, I realized they weren't asking me to save Ethan, they were asking me to sacrifice myself for him, just like they always had. The next morning, I sat in my rental car outside a diner near the interstate and called the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. "This is Major Gail Thompson. I'm ready to cooperate fully," I said. Now, here I was at Ethan's family gathering. Dinner dragged on, and Ethan kept talking about future business opportunities, looking at me every time he mentioned connections. My mother leaned over and whispered, "Maybe after dinner, you and Ethan can figure things out privately." I replied, "You mean cover for him privately?" Her smile disappeared. Finally, I set my fork down and said calmly, "There's something everybody should probably hear. 3 weeks ago, I contacted the Defense Criminal Investigative Service regarding fraudulent documents connected to Ethan's company." The room went silent. Ethan laughed nervously, but I opened the folder and placed the forged documents on the table. My mother's face went white, and my father stared at the papers in disbelief. Ethan snapped, "You went behind my back." I replied calmly, "You forged federal documents. I spent 18 years protecting my career while this family treated it like a joke." Just then, the doorbell rang. I knew who it was. I'd asked the CIS investigators to come. 2 CIS investigators and an IRS agent stood outside. The lead investigator stepped inside and said, "Mr. Ethan Thompson." Ethan didn't answer. My father exploded, "You embarrassed this family?" I looked at him calmly and said, "No, Dad. I just brought this family the one thing nobody here ever wanted to give me, the truth." After that, I left Millfield before sunrise the next morning. I didn't say goodbye. I just loaded my bag into the rental car and drove away. As I stopped at a rest area outside Tacoma for coffee, I realized my chest didn't feel tight anymore. The pressure, the fear, guilt, and anger were gone, replaced by exhaustion. Over the next few months, Ethan called me multiple times, but I never answered. Eventually, he accepted a plea agreement and was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. His company collapsed, and his wife filed for divorce. My father stopped volunteering at the church fundraisers, and my mother started sitting at the back of the church. By January, I moved into a townhouse in Alexandria. It was a quiet neighborhood with brick sidewalks and retired federal workers. One rainy Saturday afternoon, I unpacked my dress uniform and hung it in the closet. I placed a small potted plant by the window. Standing there, I realized that everything in this home was mine, and nobody was demanding access to my life anymore. A few weeks later, I visited Mr. Harris. He said, "You look terrible." I replied, "Nice seeing you, too." He grunted and let me in. I told him everything, and he said, "You did the honorable thing." I looked away because it felt lonely. He added, "The problem is, honorable things usually hurt." I started crying, and he pretended not to notice. My mother left voicemails for months, some apologetic, some manipulative. Around springtime, I mailed her a letter. I told her I loved her, hoped she stayed healthy, and that I wouldn't participate in relationships where love only appeared when someone needed something from me. Last October, walking through Old Town Alexandria, I passed a group of older women veterans sitting outside a cafe, laughing over coffee. One of them raised her coffee cup at me, and I smiled back. I realized I wasn't alone. Strength wasn't about enduring people who hurt me, it was about walking away peacefully. I didn't win against my family, I just stopped losing to them.